So my name is Philip Martin, and I am the co-owner of Philip Martin Gallery here in Los Angeles with Portia Hine. And I hope you've had a chance to see Portia, meet her either at the gallery or at the fairs. I am tremendously excited to have an opportunity to talk to John Joseph Mitchell here this morning. John Joseph Mitchell's show Mornings is our current show at the gallery. If you haven't seen it, you need to motor on over there. It's an amazing show on through the end of the month, and it's really just really great. So I'm really excited to be doing this show with John. How are you doing today, John? Thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me. Doing really well. It's beautiful
Yeah.
here, beautiful summer day. So it's nice. Got outside a little bit this morning and excited to do this talk.
That's great. So the show is called Mornings, and I think that we have 31 paintings in the show. And what we've done is we've kind of installed it in this very kind of non-hierarchical way, which I love, and kind of gives people a whole variety of entry points into the work in terms of where they might start. Um, what do you think about the hanging system? Way that we did it, or what do you think about ways in which people might initially engage with work and find stories in your practice?
I love it. I think it's the way you said give people multiple entry points into the show at large
Hmm.
is particularly interesting to me because when I make the paintings and when I envision them in the world, they do exist obviously individually,
Hmm.
but I make them in my house and they sit amongst each other and I move them around and um the way that I find myself looking at one particular day or looking at the other the next and sort of engaging more or less chaotically
Hmm.
is, I think, pretty. It's a pretty good measure of something being uh, sort of like believable or felt or
Hmm.
real. That's what we do when we're out in the world, when we walk through nature or something. We don't, there's no order to the way our eye moves. There's no order to the way we engage in the
Hmm.
world. It is sort of chaotic. So it feels natural for it to be that way. And I really like it.
That's interesting because what I'm kind of hearing you saying is that, and here we are starting with one of the paintings, that that in one's experience of the world, both for you as a maker, in terms of for you as an observer, being out in the world, then here we are in the studio making. So we have these two kinds of moments. Then we have this conversation with the viewer. So the viewer is then looking at them, whether they're seeing them here digitally or maybe they're seeing them in the space. It sounds like what you're saying is that there's a real kind of grounding uh, in the being of doing that in any given moment, but at the same time the mind is also focused on all manner of different kinds of stimuli, making conversations and what they're looking at, and that you as a maker are doing that too. You mentioned, in fact, at one point, like pursuing one shape leads and kind of determining it, like what's the shape of the cat, would then lead you to all of these other shapes. Like, what's the shape of the house? You want to talk a little bit about some of, or does any of that resonate? Or
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's it's important to me in making the paintings, or rather, it feels like paintings which are more successful, or I feel content with, and I can leave them be. They often come from a place of following a sort of progression of questions or suggestions that are not necessarily dictated from the outset. So like for instance, sometimes you go into the studio and I like, no, I need to make this
Mhm,
value different. I need to make this color different. And I
mhm,
set myself up with like a task at
Hmm.
hand, you know? And that's fine sometimes, but most of the time that the interesting sort of creative happening is when you allow your when I allow my brain and my hand to move from thing to thing as as it sort of suggests and dictates.
Hmm.
And that's again that seems more like a in keeping and in nature with how we engage in the world in an interesting way. We do have daily tasks. We got to do our chores, but that's not necessarily where we find our, fun. It's when we follow sort of casual impulses. And the way that sort of plays out in paintings is just as you said, where one shape is made. So here the I started with actually that little clump of flowers on the left. And once that sort of thing is made, and I make these scratch marks into it, then the next question is, okay, what is the sheep going to look like? How are the legs of the sheep, the horn of the sheep, the head of the sheep? How do these things relate to the clump of flowers there? Well,
Hmm.
there needs to be some similarity. They need to look like they're made from the same matter, for lack of a better word.
Hmm.
We take we take for granted when we sort of look at the natural world that the things in it are born of the same laws and of the same stuff, the same
Hmm.
organizing principles and the same material.
Uh-huh.
So when I want to make a painting and I want to not necessarily make a perfect transcription
Yeah.
of life, but I want to make a metaphorical experience
Yeah.
where in the world this is, the clump is to the sheep, and then in my painting as the clump of flowers is the sheep again, right? So
Yeah.
it's
Right.
a what is that? A simile, I think. It's
I've
a,
never been good at sorting those out,
I
but
know, me neither. But
yeah.
but this is to that as
Yeah.
this is to that, and
Yeah.
it's that way of sort of trying to organize the stuff in the picture and the material of the paint and the substrate and all,
Yeah.
and it's hard to know like necessarily what exact steps or what exact trains of thought or techniques are going to lead to that sort of believability where the painting feels as though it's made of the same stuff and of a common organizing principle of some internal logic, just
Yeah.
as the natural world is. But that's the goal.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting. I mean, obviously two things are coming to play for me. Number one, your use of the word simile, of course, and my saying, well, I can't keep, ever keep track of those. What I mean by that is these ideas that our generation or my generation, you certainly read in art school, all the semiotics of metonymy, simile, all those kinds of things are all. It's interesting because they're very theoretical, of course, in some sense, and I never really did learn them as cold theory. But in the process of actually making things, they come up all the time in terms of like, well, this is a representing system, and so what is this thing? As Maurice Dennis, the famous Nabi painter, would point out that before a painting is anything, it's paint on a support. Or if you want to talk about it in semiotic terms, you might say they're applied physical signs, meaning the paint. The other thing, of course, I like about your practice too, your comment is, of course, you're a big fan of poetry. And, a lot of the words that you're using also have to do with the flow of poetry. So, in two ways, I'm kind of hearing you describing representational systems, but I'm also hearing you describe the artist or your particular feeling of a certain kind of poetry in one's experience in the landscape. Do any of those kind of resonate with you?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a way in which, um, in both poetry and painting, but also, just like arts at large,
Hmm.
which we're trying to have the artist or the poet sort of filter an experience or a perspective, filter it for the audience to then have a um a sort of similar but not equal vision or experience.
Yeah.
And so then the question for anybody who's making something is
Mhm.
what to include, what to
Yeah.
exclude,
Right.
right? It's just
Right.
it's more or less just editing. Like
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
for the poet, there's every word in the English language is sort of the beginning of the poem,
Yeah. Right.
and
Yeah.
then
Sure.
it's which ones are we going to keep,
Yeah.
and I think about in making the paintings, like when I'm out in the world and I'm looking and I'm looking for stuff, either very specifically or just like casually on a bike ride or something, and I'm
Hmm.
looking for things to paint. It's real important to me to not let myself get confused about what I saw or witnessed,
Uh,
So here it's like, what was my visual experience?
yeah.
Oh,
Interesting.
it was dune grass in front of a dune in the ocean.
Yeah.
So that's all there is to include. Of course, there was 1,000 shells on the beach, but that's not what I that's not what I like mentioned to myself. That's not what they did not contribute in
Yeah.
a way to the experience. So
Yeah.
there's no need to try to include that information.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, that's really interesting. And of course, another thing we've talked a lot about is Japanese printmakers like Hiroshige or Okusai. Obviously they are these incredible editors. And we've also talked about Albert Pinkham Ryder as an artist that, I always come back to because you made this amazing point that you know exactly what Albert Pinkham Ryder wants you to see. Um, that force of feeling and that, I don't want to call it naivete, but that self-taught aspect. But then, of course, with the Japanese printmakers, like they're so sophisticated, it's like blows your mind
Yeah.
when you see the information they've put in there and the interlocking systems by which they've kind of organized that information to you. Does
Yeah.
that, and you, of course, do you want to talk a little bit more about it, or does that resonate with you?
No, it absolutely does, and it's so in sort of that organizing, that editing, that like question of what to include or exclude. It's not only important the for content wise, for like the nameable things in a picture,
Hmm.
but also it's important in terms of the formal elements.
Hmm.
So if what's interesting in a painting is, like here is the way it was to me, the way in which the flowers were in front of this group of chickens, you know, if that's the thing that's interesting, then I need to then, or you need to then not only include or exclude whatever parts of that scene you are interested in, but
Hmm.
also include or exclude all of the formal possibilities, texture, color,
Yeah.
shape, scale. You need to narrow that down as well in order to keep it interesting, in
Yeah.
order to keep that sort of instant I guess like candidness,
Yeah.
in a way that everything seems like born in a singular moment.
Yeah.
And when when I sort of like begin with a picture,
Hmm.
it's big shapes. It's, big and then small,
Hmm.
and trying to keep out sort of like noise in the middle,
Yeah.
Might get there. There might end up being some noise in the middle by way of, working through the painting. But at the beginning, it's just the placement of um, a few elements.
Yeah.
And I think that the Albert Pinkham Ryder and the Japanese printmakers, Hokusai, Hiroshige, Haranobu, they all do this very beautiful, and many artists, but they all do this beautiful thing where the the thing that is interesting, so for Albert Pinkham Ryder, the moon or the boat or something, is looks like, almost like it was placed first and everything
Hmm.
was built around it,
Yeah.
as opposed to in sort of the, like the tradition of, like Thomas Cole, or
Yeah.
even like, French academic classical painting, where things are
Right.
sort of like built from back to front.
Yeah. Yeah.
In a way, it seems with those artists, um, the sort of thing is built from like inside out, like, like the placement of one thing and then building off of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's very interesting. And then one thing that I caught just by pure happenstance, listening to you talk at the exact moment as we were going through here, is that obviously I see that in some sense there's a repetition of the chicken arrangement between these two paintings. And so I'm thinking about the development of one's personal language also, where you get into something and then you find yourself maybe doing something you did before or remembering, oh, I did it this way before. So you have all these personal cues too, while you're also discovering. Is that a sort of thing too within your own language?
Yeah, absolutely. There's um, a sort of like funny impulse to say, "Oh, I like that painting. I want to make it again."
Yeah,
You
right.
know,
Of course.
and when I find myself doing that to my own paintings,
Yeah,
it's very rewarding.
of
It
course.
feels it
Yeah.
feels good because that's ultimately what I'm doing in my day to day anyhow. It's just
Yeah.
normally that the paintings that I want to sort of recreate, or the ideas I want to explore and recreate, are from other people,
Yeah.
So when there's when I'm working on something and there's a painting on my wall and it's like, oh, I want to recreate that painting, then I know that that was a good one.
Yeah.
That's a
Well, I
fun
think that
experience.
that's definitely something that's a foible, I'm going to say, of where we are, which is the notion, I think, because of how, because we're operating in a globalized modern art world and there's this sense of consumption that people want to be believing that they're consuming something new. So somehow they don't want the artist to repeat anything. And that obviously is just doesn't make any sense. And of course, someone like Munch is an incredible person on that. I mean, he painted the Scream like literally 9 times. And there's this beautiful conversation in one of the Munch books that I've read where he talked about, if you have a good ideas like live forever.
Yeah,
And, they live in you. But he also even meant culturally because he was talking about, he comments about Da Vinci and he's like, there's all these Da Vinci paintings we've never seen because they were destroyed, but they live in culture and they live on in us. I mean, hilariously, then as an aside to global consumer consumption, artists like Courbet and Munch were also extremely aware of that and organized their own shows, like John Martin and sold tickets and all that kind of thing. But
sure.
anyway, the feeling of, I do think that that's something that audience members need to really negotiate and understand about art making and recognize it's a valuable part of human experience as opposed to somehow blocking on that. I mean, I don't that just that's a response to what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, in my consumption of painting, in my consumption of music, in my engagement with the world, I really, I've never, even as a kid, I've always been fascinated by things from the past and things that were new. Not that I've been skeptical of, but I don't find myself asking questions about their origin or their um their being in any way, almost because in a funny way it's like because the thing is new, that information is almost it's too um I don't know what the word is, it's like too apparent, you
Yeah.
know?
Hmm.
I want a sense of having to sort of make up some conjecture about where a thing came from or
Yeah.
something, like that sort of uh exploration of what it could of what a thing could be
Yeah.
feels has always felt more potent to me of things that are old
Yeah.
and in a way less knowable, I guess.
Yeah.
um
Well,
yeah.
switching up gears a little bit, I think going back to your point about similes and whatnot, there's a lot of wood in this show.
Yeah.
And this is kind of fun because it's obviously a painting of wood on wood.
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about your relationship? This is also fun because here in LA we have tons of coyotes, and in fact, there's a whole like National Geographic special happening in my, right behind my house because there's a litter with four pups right now, and they're
Whoa.
eagerly like doing all their things. Do you want to talk a little bit about your relationship to the support, the frame, wood, how you apply, anything in there?
Yeah, there's sort of a few strands of thought and sort of investigation that have led to the way that these paintings in this show were particularly made. One being that the sort of the scale and the physical sort of presence of the thing being wood framed, made by myself, just from raw pieces of wood, and then primed and prepped and painted. That felt like a really, when I first started working that way, exclusively 5 or 6 years ago, it felt like a big deal in terms of the way I was caring for the thing.
Hmm.
It felt like I just cared much more, and it felt like a much deeper connection to the outcome.
Hmm.
So sort of like beginning there, and then refining the techniques and the materials and all. But also I like um, I really like furniture and
Right.
um, old wood furniture, and I've been looking at a lot of it recently.
Hmm.
And there's a funny way in which um, we engage with a nice piece of furniture where we appreciate its form and its beauty. We accept its sort of flaws as just part of its life, as it's used.
Hmm.
And we also continue to use it. This combination of like form and function, and the way they seem like a matter of fact part of a space. And
Hmm.
I kind of want my paintings to operate in a similar way, where they are a matter of fact, at least in my own house when I put them on the wall, they're a matter of fact part of the building. They
Yeah.
are sort of not up for debate. They are there and um, they contribute to the visual life of my existence in the house, and hopefully other people's existence in their houses, and then in your existence in the gallery. And that goes back to the hanging of it, the sort of like non-hierarchical. It makes it feel matter of fact in a way that this is just how it is. There's no questions about it. Now look at the pictures,
Yeah.
and that's appealing to me. But then back to your initial question of there's so much wood
Yeah.
and there's so much wood exposed.
And that's what I was
Um,
trying to show people is just to see
yeah,
paint application, there's wood, what are you going to tell me here? Staining? Is that
yeah,
what?
yeah.
Uh-huh.
So
Then there's the
so
wood frames, which are painted. So yeah, yeah.
yeah, so
There's
there's
inscribing, there's carving, there's a lot of different things happening.
yeah, and they all those sort of like techniques or ways of working the material have a um have a place, and some get used more than others in particular paintings. But in terms of like the using of the wood and of the wood grain
Hmm.
became really interesting to me as I sort of follow the train of thought of I really like using colors um, where if the colors apply to one shape, um, so in this painting, the sort of flowers in the foreground on the bottom right there, that's the exposed wood. That's a color, right? But then it's
Hmm.
also found in the dock, it's also found in the boat, and it's also found in the background. And
Hmm.
it's interesting to me that a color can represent points in all three, primary spaces of a picture.
The different
And
zones moving back.
yeah, and when
And
I
also you might talk about how you structure, well, maybe you're about to, how you structure those spaces and yeah, go ahead. My apologies.
yeah, so the color allowing colors to be used at multiple points of space does two things for me. It sort of creates a harmony where things look like they're made of the same stuff, like I was talking about before.
Hmm.
But it also then reinforces the surface of the painting. It reinforces the inherent sort of objecthood flatness of the painting
Right.
while allowing there to be a picture at the same time.
Hmm.
And that tension of the picture and of the object, of the illusion and of the reality is the primary interest for me in painting.
Hmm.
So allowing colors to sort of be in multiple points in space does that, but then the exposed ground doing that just felt like another way of exploring that same idea that became pretty potent territory for me to try to navigate through.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is another really, I mean, that's just really beautiful how I think it's inscribed, but it almost feels like a brushstroke.
Yeah. That is inscribed. So that's like the paint is sort of like probably halfway dry, and then I go
Mhm.
back through with some tools and try to pull away some. So I don't
Yeah.
have full control over it,
It
because
reminds me
some's
of
gonna stay.
some of my favorite Liechtenstein paintings are the abstractions because I love
Yeah.
how they work like abstractions, but they're really signs for abstraction. I mean, they're so
Yeah.
genius. It's like outrageous.
Yeah, it's
Um,
they're painted representations of.
they're just such
Yeah.
amazing pictures. Another thing I've got two things. One, and I'll keep them in mind. And obviously, we're normally wrapping up, but I feel like we can run over. And if people want to put
Sure.
stuff in the chat, feel free. I hope that John knows how to use Zoom. He's a teacher. I'm not good at it.
Yeah.
I can never figure out how I'm supposed to get into all that stuff. Um, But anyway, what I just wanted to say is, I thought I had you and I have chatted about this thing I was reading in the Kirk Varnado book on Caillebotte, that he made this interesting point that for the Impressionists, what those French 19th century painters saw was, I never really understood, like, why is there this interest in Japanese printmaking? Like, what did that mean? And one of the things he talked about is that what happened was French 19th century painters see Western perspective, go to Japan, be used in Japan, and then when it comes back, they see it the ways in which another culture is using that visual system, and they're seeing it used as a surface motif as opposed to something that's driving a kind of Italian, Renaissance space with perspective. And then, of course, that opens up, I guess, the grid, so to speak, and those kinds of shape relations. And it seemed like that was a comment that kind of resonated with you a little bit
Yeah, absolutely.
in your own work.
Yeah, the funny thing about the way perspective does get used in Japanese printmaking that's different from how it was used in, beginning in, you know, 14th century Italy or whatever, 15th century,
Yeah.
is that perspective and the diagonals used to create visual depth, the and to carry a viewer sort of back in space in sort of measured demarcated steps,
Hmm.
like every yard.
Hmm.
Well, the Japanese printmakers seemingly to me took all of those angles and used it to have the viewer move across the surface of the painting and
Yeah,
up and
totally.
down as
Yeah, yeah,
opposed
right.
to back, but they're
Hmm.
the same shapes.
Yeah,
They're the
yeah,
same they're the same structural elements.
yeah.
And again, that's to me more interesting because that deals with the sort of inherent um sort of duality or conflict in a painting or in a picture of any
Yep,
kind, is
yep.
that it is both a thing, an object, a surface, and we will perceive space in it.
Hmm.
Um, so that so I sort of find myself when trying to deal with visual space and moving back through space as always trying to keep it also on the surface.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because, of course, that gets us right back to the applied physical signs comment. And as you point out, the fact that in a gallery, you're a person standing in front of a flat object on a wall. But then we, of course, have the 14th century painting as window idea,
Mm-hmm.
as you point
Mm-hmm.
out. Or so that's yeah, so good that yeah, totally. So that's yeah, don't that was quite something that you just said. So then the other thing I wanted to just mention is that, of course, behind you you have this beautiful Japanese screen, or not Japanese, might be Chinese. My apologies. I'm not an
Chinese, yeah.
expert. And it's huge. And it's something that you apparently found on the street in Philadelphia, which says something about Philadelphia. And you also restored it, which is something. And I
Yeah.
was really kind of amazed to see that you had this kind of real practical knowledge of that object. And then also, as you mentioned, in terms of your house, which for me, as someone living in California, is kind of unbelievable because it's around 1800. So all of the intervals in the house and all of the handmadeness are totally the cultural coming together of a completely different era, and
Yeah.
and how people came around objectness and architecture as opposed to everything off the shelf and all the 1 2, the 2 and 4 and 8 foot measurement 12 units that we use now. um, anyway, there's a lot of, and then of course, I often think of Charles Sheeler because I'm kind of obsessed with this book that he did of drawings and this Shaker house that he lived in. Anyway, so that's something I wanted to add with regard to intervals and houses and objectness.
Yeah, I think. it's funny because the I growing up there wasn't like a ton of art in my world,
Hmm.
but there was books,
Of
there was
aesthetics, lots of
yeah there
aesthetic things. Yeah, that's
yeah there was records, there was like
yeah.
my grandmother's house. She collected and made dolls. She sewed everything.
Hmm.
So and my other grandmother made these fascinating, she would put these like shadow boxes together for every season with all her little
Wow.
trinkets,
Yeah.
of autumn and of spring.
Yeah.
And and so there wasn't much like fine art. There was a like care for things, and there was very much a care for the home,
Hmm.
a desire for the home to be a pleasant place,
Hmm.
and a pride in that.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's all. And I think very much that my interest in painting, well, it comes from one sort of like just like naturally wanting to draw, but it also
Yeah.
comes from wanting to make my home more pleasant.
Yeah.
And I want my paintings are first and foremost to decorate my house, and then what is left over, what is extra, hopefully other people can decorate their house. And I think that that's sort of like maybe like a little bit like a taboo thing to say
No, I love it. It's
about art
yes,
and
no,
painting,
totally. Yeah, no,
but I
totally.
think that that's what my real that's that is my desire,
Yeah.
so that needs to be in there.
Well, I think it gets into, I mean, this is such a time, and I hope that everyone is safe. I hope your loved ones are safe. I mean, here in
Mhm.
LA, like it's pretty intense watching people I know and just everything under attack from the
Yeah,
federal government just after we survived these fires and all this.
yeah,
The feeling of interiority in ourselves. That's the humanist message that we can understand one another and we can see each other as human beings. And so how you're living in your space and how you're relating to people and how you're carrying your consciousness, so to speak, and interrelating, that stuff's very important. It's not important. It's the key to all manner of kind of nonviolence and different kinds of things. So I think that acknowledgement, it's really important to, Buddhists would say that in order to be compassionate to others, you have to be compassionate to yourself. You have to recognize that you're a part of the equation. And it's egoistic to kind of deny that, actually. And that
yeah,
so anyway, so saying that you're decorating your home, I mean, of course, you're using the word decorating, which we're all going to, everyone's going to be like, or we're taught to say that. But I think
yeah,
it's also really amazing how you're honoring your grandmothers, maybe both Italian American, and this connection to their families and what they wanted for them and the experience they wanted to have for them and having, been around your mom's also doing this
mhm,
in her
mhm.
house. It's beautiful, and I think I really think it's important that you're saying that and putting that um, like on an important creative level. I'm struck by that, and of course, Japanese design and all that also flows into all that. So many responses to what I think is
Yeah.
is a really beautiful and actually extremely profound thing to say.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Well, so, I think we're probably wrapping it up here. I don't know if there's anything that you might have wanted to cover that we didn't talk about.
I think we did pretty good.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Well, I'm really thrilled that you took the time to join me. Thank you to everybody that's out there. Again, I hope you're all safe and your loved ones are safe and I hope that art can be meaningful to you at this time. It's certainly something that's always important to me. Thanks so much for joining me, John. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Please write me if you have any questions about the show or works you might have seen or anything. By all means, let me know. And hope you have a great weekend, John, and I'll talk to you later.
Likewise. Thanks, Phil.
All right, take care. Bye.
See ya.